the reason that we are bringing OG back up, because I'll be honest, I have treated him as if he's completely off the board for a bunch of reasons.
There we go.
He's still off the board, I think. Please watch the rest of the show. It's
you
really important
piece of
for our
shit over
YouTube.
there. Anyway.
Wow, piece of shit feels a little hard.
For two main reasons. One,
What was it?
the Knicks gave up not just picks, but also young players as part of this deal. And normally you don't do that unless you have a pretty good indication, like, this guy's going to stay. Here's the more telling thing to me. If OG was going to be an actual free agent this summer and was gettable, there is very little chance he plays in that Game 7 in the physical condition that he's in. Like, I respect how competitive he is. I think his teammates certainly appreciated it. If his future earning potential was on the line in Game 7, no responsible team around him, no responsible individual person in OG Anunoby is saying, put me on the floor, coach. They are sitting wrapped in ice, maybe in a nice suit on the sideline.
Are you saying his camp?
Good luck, everybody. Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right.
So,
And
that's
also,
how,
it has to be reminded how close his camp is to Knicks brass. His agent is Leon Rose's son. They probably understand where each side stands.
we come into this show having I'd say a high degree of confidence he will be back in New York. But Ian Begley, who is a great plugged-in reporter in New York, has been covering the Knicks and just covering New York basketball for quite a long time. He's at SNY, comes out with a story today saying, among other things, so he says, thinks it's reasonable to expect Anunoby is going to get $35 million annually on his next contract. Goes on to say, quote, as previously reported, members of the Philadelphia 76ers have seen Anunoby as an offseason target. Paul George is also a target for Philadelphia, but if the Sixers can't get George, I could see them making a big offer to Anunoby. And here's the critical part. If for no other reason than it would force New York to match the money. And so OG Anunoby re-enters the conversation here. Some of this is leverage. Some of this is, he fits in with the Sixers. Also, I don't know how much we discussed this when we talked about OG this year. The Sixers definitely did want to get him. They definitely inquired about him when he was on the block in Toronto. Unlike Pascal Siakam, who we have said many times on this show, was not going to play here and with Nick Nurse again, that there was a little bit too much chaos in that relationship. There was real interest in potentially bringing OG in this season. The difference between what the Knicks could offer and what the Sixers could offer is that the Sixers did not have the young players, guys with theoretical upside, to go along with the picks. And so now we're back here heading into the summer. And really the question is, what is the number the Knicks are willing to give OG, and can/will the Sixers exceed that? Where do you think Begley floats the $35 million?
I was going to say that might be the most interesting part of the entire thing.
Yeah.
Because that's, I think, under what most people expect. And he said $35 million annually, not even starting at $30 million. So that would be starting at like $30 million. That would be an easy yes. I would offer that in a heartbit.
Unfortunately, if the money's even, you're not getting it.
Well, right, especially because New York can offer 8% raises over 5
rather
years.
than 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the max that they can offer him is 5 for $245 is the max extension
And
that
the 6 would be
Anunoby can
somewhere
get.
around like $4,200.
Yeah, so you're talking, again, that's essentially the same deal that you can offer Paul George. Now, would the Sixers offer a max to Anunoby? I'm more skeptical on that than Paul George, because I think they know with Paul George, or I would say they probably feel a reasonable degree of certainty that if you don't give him the max, you can't get him. If the Knicks are hoping for $35 million on Anunoby, there might be a middle ground number in there. Is it 44? Is it 45? Could you go as low as 40? Are the Knicks going to haggle that much over $5 million? And also, here's the more important part. Like, let's say all options are on the table, and you can get Anunoby for 40 rather than PG for 50 a year. Is that a meaningful enough difference to go in for a player who I think offensively is a good degree worse than Paul George.
Good degree worse, but I think so. We talked about
offensively
OG
anyway.
Yeah.
We'll do both sides of
they're not in the
it's
same
not. Yeah, they're
stratosphere.
not even close. Yeah, the other direction.
I think a lot of people are going to look at his per game averages, around 15 per game. He is a star defender and a role player on offense, but the key is he's a role player on offense who doesn't get in the way at all. He spaces the floor. He can attack a little bit. He can contribute a little bit on the glass. He doesn't have sort of like that weakness that inhibits you like a lot of defensive role players do, namely the shooting. Over the last 5 or so years, dating back to 2020, he has shot 38.3% on over 1,400 three-point attempts. He has developed into a good reliable shooter. Yes. And if you look at that team with and without him, he made a monster impact on defense. That defensive impact, we've talked about it a lot. If you can get a big wing who can play good perimeter defense, that'll help your rebounding. It also helps you get out on the break, so he helps you in the half court by spacing the floor. He helps you in the transition by getting stops and forcing turnovers and getting rebounds. He would help both sides of the ball. And he's so much young. What is he, 26, 27, somewhere in that range?
He will turn 27 in mid-July. So you'll have him for his 27, 28, 29, and age 30 seasons.
He's a little bit like split. I hate this phrase. Why do people say it? It's a little bit like splitting the baby, where you get immediate help now at a position you need and in a role you need, while also being young enough to have a long runway. I would have him over a lot of people. I don't know exactly where that is, but if you're talking in the $35 to $40 million range, that is also $9 to $14 million less than Paul George, less than Jimmy Butler. When you add another $14 million to what the Sixers can do, all of a sudden you can do both. You can get, OG Anunoby at, say, 35 to 40, and you can go out and get another starter level on top of that, and then use that room mid-level. Like, you get a lot more flexibility than you would with one of these stars. He would be pretty high on my list. Would I have concern over giving him a $40+ million contract? Yeah, of course. All of these big dollar contracts, especially with the double apron era that we're in, are going to be concerning. But it does leave you with significantly more flexibility, and he's a piece that should be a good fit now and be a good fit for the remainder of that contract.
And then you also add the back to the basket thing,
one of the
too.
major differences between now and when we were talking about this in December, you're not giving up first-round picks.
Right. It's just it's the same case we've made for Paul George, right? Which is you're only using cap space to get him. And that opens up other avenues for, hey, we still have these 4 first-round picks. We can move them for a Caruso. We can move them for a shot creator. We can move them for whatever it might be. It's
way less risky now than it was 6 months ago. And also, now that you have $20 to $25 million in salary cap space left over, those draft picks that now you don't have to spend to get OG, you can now use that credibly in trades to take back salary. You have so many more options. This is appealing to me, yes.
And just adding to the offensive point where he can play with his back to the basket too, because he is physical, play against even some people that are his size, but in terms of height, physicality, though, he can run right through them with what he does, and he doesn't do things that he typically can't do to hurt your team. My issue, though, and I know we were going to get to this because we talked about this just a bit, is the record that he had with the Knicks when he first got there, when we saw some number like 23-2 that he had. They were just winning and blowing teams out and destroying them, and he was fantastic on the floor. Then he wasn't. Then it was no longer 23-2 because it stayed at 23-2. Because he then missed another month for an injury that he sustained. And when he got back, he also got hurt once again during the postseason. And part of that maybe is because of what Thibodeau does in running his players into the ground. But it's also something that he has dealt with since, as we talked about, high school, through college, and now in the NBA, where you have to factor that in what you want to discuss when you're talking about the contract that you want to offer him, because that is a big piece of it when it comes to that player.
And I see a lot of people in the chat mentioning his injury history. Show me the 27-year-old star defending wing who can shoot 40% from 3 and doesn't get injured and is available. There's a reason players become available. It's because they have faults. Mm-hmm. Whether it's going to be
Derek
age.
is slowly moving to the corner I was on like 2 months ago, which is like, you have to make a decision on someone. You have to take risk on in some way. It might be age, it might be years, it might be money, it might be health. Somewhere there is going to be a risk.
100%. We hemmed and hawed a lot in the lead up to the trade deadline. That's 2 reasons. One, I like to point out the what is appealing and what is concerning to help maybe the listeners and viewers make a more informed decision. I think that's more important than necessarily what my own individual opinion is, but also more directly, that was at a trade deadline when we knew we had this second window. We knew we had a free agency and a draft period where you can either sign a player or trade a player. So you were going to be a little more selective because of that. Like I said, him not having to give up picks for him now materially changes what we're talking about. It changes the discussion in a big way. So yeah, if you can show me that perfect player who the Sixers can sign or trade for, I'm all ears.
We all silly like the mayor.